you can eat meat. Because 500 million years ago, a monster invented hunting. Standing on the seabed, it used the pincers on its head to crush its prey one by one. Scientists have counted in the fossils. This creature could kill 200 organisms a day. Can you imagine that? The marine life of that era. 90 fun turam of them were eaten by him until they became endangered species. In 1975, paleontologist Whittington from the University of Cambridge stared at the fossil, suffering from insomnia for 3 consecutive weeks. Finally, he said one sentence at an academic conference: "This thing has rewritten the rules of life on Earth." Because before he appeared, all animals were just gnawing on mud and algae on the seabed. Until this 5'8" monster grew a straw with pincers. Predators appeared on Earth for the first time. What's even more terrifying is that in 2009, the University of Toronto conducted an experiment. They discovered that the monster's eyes could lock onto prey in 5 directions simultaneously. 500 million years ago, it already possessed a 360-degree field of vision, and the reason for its extinction remains a mystery. Some scientists say he was wiped out by his own descendants. But before I tell you how he died, you first need to know how he lived. This monster is called Opabinia regalis. The name comes from a mountain pass in the Canadian Rockies, called Opabinia Pass in 1909. American paleontologist Walcott was in those mountains. When he stepped on a piece of dark shale, he bent down to pick it up, flipped it over, and froze for a full 3 seconds. Inside that stone was pressed something he had never seen before. It wasn't a fish, it wasn't a shrimp, and it wasn't any biological phylum he had ever studied. Its body was slender, like a squashed caterpillar, but on its head grew 5 thin stalks. Each stalk was topped with an eye. 5 eyes. Not 2, but 5. Walcott's first reaction at the time was to assume the fossil was broken or assembled incorrectly. But it wasn't broken. This is the true appearance of Opabinia regalis. What happened next was even more bizarre. Walcott took the fossil back to study, and the more he looked, the more wrong it seemed. Because besides the 5 eyes, a tube extended from the front of this creature's head. It wasn't an antenna. It wasn't a leg. It was a flexible, retractable hose, nearly 1/3 the length of its body, with a pair of small pincers at the end. Do you know what this tube was used for? Eating. He used this tube, like a robotic arm, reaching into the seabed mud, grabbing worms, grabbing small arthropods, and then delivering the food to its mouth. Notice that his hand and his mouth were separated. The hand was at the front, and the mouth was underneath. The food had to take a U-turn to enter the digestive tract, which, among all known creatures on Earth, is almost one of a kind. When the scientists first saw this structure, they remained silent for a long time. Then someone said, "Is this thing for real?" Yes, he was absolutely for real. The body of Opabinia regalis consists of 15 segments. On each side of every segment, there is a pair of flat, lobe-like appendages. These appendages are not legs. They could not support him to walk on the sea floor. Instead, like fish fins, through rhythmic undulation, they pushed his body to glide slowly through the water. At the end of his tail, there are 3 fan-shaped fins, which were responsible for steering. His overall swimming posture was somewhat like today's mobula, also known as the devil ray. He would glide slowly and quietly along the sea floor, barely disturbing anything. This was not because he was lazy, but because his survival strategy from the very beginning was not offense, but reconnaissance. 5 eyes were distributed at different angles on his head. Some were responsible for monitoring the water above, others for scanning the sides, and one sat firmly in the middle of his head, like a watchtower, in that era where predators could pounce from any direction at any time. This visual system was his core asset for survival. The problem is, in the same sea, there was another creature swimming around. It was called Anomalocaris. Anomalocaris was over 1 meter long. more than 10 times the size of Opabinia regalis. With 2 huge compound eyes, a pair of sickle-shaped front appendages, and a ring-shaped mouth, it could crush the hard shells of trilobites. 2. Opabinia regalis. Anomalocaris was death on the move. Once targeted, there was basically no chance of escape. Therefore, the 5 eyes of Opabinia regalis were not used for finding food most of the time, but for looking for others. Upon spotting a threat, he would immediately hug the ground and bury himself into the silt, disappearing. This was the secret to his survival for millions of years in the Cambrian. It wasn't by fighting, but by rapid perception and by disappearing in advance. Yet, for such a sophisticated survival machine, in the history of science, he experienced an extremely absurd ordeal. After the fossils were unearthed in 1911, for a full 60 years, no one truly understood what he looked like. Early researchers mistook his proboscis for a tail, and his mouth was drawn in a completely wrong place. Some even thought the fossils were placed upside down. It wasn't until 1975 that paleontologist Whittington from the University of Cambridge, along with his team, reanalyzed all the specimens from the Burgess Shale and finally restored the true appearance of Opabinia regalis. When he was at the academic conference, presenting that reconstruction, the scientists in the audience collectively laughed out loud. It wasn't mockery. It was that feeling of being struck by reality. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Because this thing is just too absurd, Whittington later wrote in his memoirs. At that moment, I realized that our imagination regarding the possibilities of life has always been far, far too conservative. But what truly allowed Opabinia to completely rewrite the textbooks was a discovery in 2022. The Royal Ontario Museum in Canada, together with the University of Cambridge in the UK, used high-precision synchrotron radiation imaging technology to conduct a brand new scan of existing fossils. Inside the fossils, they found a brain. A perfectly preserved brain from 500 million years ago. This is an extremely rare discovery in the history of paleontology. Scientists found that the brain of Opabinia was directly connected to his 5 eyes. Each eye had its own independent neural pathway, converging into a central processing area. At the same time, a highly developed nerve bundle ran through that proboscis, extending from the brain all the way to the claws at the tip, enabling precise control over predatory movements. Even more shocking is the overall structure of this brain. It is highly similar to the nervous systems of modern spiders and scorpions. What does this mean? It means that 500 million years ago, complex nervous systems had already appeared. Not just simple ganglia, but a brain in the truest sense, a primitive brain capable of processing multi-channel visual information and precisely controlling limb movements. This discovery pushed back the evolutionary history of the arthropod nervous system by a full 500 million years. But here lies a question that leaves everyone in silence. Since Opabinia possessed such a sophisticated brain, such an advanced visual system, and such a unique predatory tool, why did he go extinct? The answer is hidden within his design logic. Every feature of Opabinia was highly specialized. 5 eyes meant extremely high neural processing costs. A retractable proboscis meant a slower pace of hunting. Having separate hands and mouth meant a more fragile front end of the body. His gut showed a distinct zigzagging bend inside his body. This suggests that the food he processed was fragmentary, hard to digest, and consisted of small prey. High investment, low return. In the Cambrian era, when energy was extremely scarce, this strategy was a form of chronic depletion. Meanwhile, the direction of evolution was quietly shifting. More and more organisms began to concentrate their eyes at the front of the head. They began to merge their front limbs with their mouths. They began to pursue speed, efficiency, and the highest energy returns. At the lowest possible cost, Opabinia failed to keep up with this version of data. His design was too complex, too precise. so precise that it couldn't be simplified, to adapt to a world that increasingly valued efficiency. That's why some scientists proposed a hypothesis. He was wiped out by his own descendants, not through direct hunting, but through competition, as the ancestors of arthropods gradually evolved more efficient body structures, faster movement speeds, and stronger predatory capabilities. The ecological niche of Opabinia was squeezed out bit by bit until it disappeared. He didn't lose to natural enemies, he lost to the times. This ending, when you think about it deeply, carries an indescribable sense of sorrow. A creature with the most advanced brain 500 million years ago, a being that, in terms of visual systems, surpassed all other organisms of his era, was ultimately eliminated. Not because he wasn't smart enough, but because he was too far ahead, so far ahead, that he couldn't be accommodated by the laws of survival of that era. In 2022, scientists in Utah, USA, discovered a new fossil and named it Utaurora, the Utah Opabinia. This proves that Opabinia was not an isolated case. In the Cambrian oceans, this type of creature might have been widely distributed. It's just that most of them failed to leave behind fossils. Every Opabinia fossil is the result of an extremely low probability event. For a soft-bodied creature to be preserved intact, it requires extremely specific geological conditions. Before decaying, it must be rapidly buried by fine silt and sand. Then, under eons of geological pressure, it turns into rock, only to be stepped on hundreds of millions of years later by a human who happened to be passing by. To this day, the number of complete Opabinia fossils found does not exceed 20. Each one is a letter from 500 million years ago. Today, when you look at yourself in the mirror, with 2 eyes and 1 mouth, hands and mouth located at different parts of the same body, able to run, jump, chase, and flee. Have you ever wondered how many failed experiments this body had to go through? Before it was finally selected, Opabinia was the most serious attempt among those failed experiments. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a mistake. He was a problem that nature tried very seriously to solve 500 million years ago. It's just that, in the end, he wasn't chosen for the standard answer, but because of him. We now know that life reaching this stage today wasn't an inevitability, but a lucky survivor among countless possibilities. Next time you eat meat, think of this little 5'8" fellow. He traded the disappearance of his entire species for the existence of hunting on this earth. And you are the ultimate beneficiary of that possibility.